Her words took me by surprise, and I found myself nodding in agreement. Even if I hurriedly said I wasn't looking, it was already too late. Moreover, she went on to say something absolutely astonishing. At first, I was like, what is she talking about? But her words concealed a gentle sentiment. Those words became the turning point, and both our lives changed dramatically after that. My name is Jake, 23 years old. After college, I failed to get a proper job and ended up working part-time at a resort hotel. Well, I guess I'm what you'd call a part-time worker. The reason I chose the resort hotel goes back to an event during college. When I was in my junior year, my beloved grandmother, who always doted on me, passed away. Though I lived in New York and my grandmother near a resort area in upstate New York, we didn't see each other often, but we stayed in touch regularly. I loved her deeply, knowing how much she cherished me. After her passing, her home remained untouched for a while. Around the time I was graduating college, discussions arose about whether to sell or rent out her home. That's when I took it over. This was mainly because, after failing in my job hunting, I felt a bit alienated by my parents and friends, as if I were damaged goods. I didn't really want to stay in New York anymore. I figured, if I'm going to work as a part-time worker, it didn't matter if I stayed in the city or near the resort where my grandmother lived. So, I moved to my grandmother's house, almost as if running away from the city. Not far from my grandmother's, within biking distance, there was this big resort hotel, so I decided to work there. One early morning during my shift at the resort, I spotted a woman walking by the poolside before it was open to guests. "Excuse me, the pool isn't open yet." When I spoke up, the woman smiled warmly and asked, "Are you one of the part-timers?" Turning to face me, she was a strikingly beautiful woman with distinct mole under her eyes. I was taken aback by her long, pale legs extending from her skirt, trying my best not to show my surprise. "Yes, I just started this spring." Hearing this, she smiled and said, "Oh, I see," and extended her right hand towards me. "My name is Alyssa Smith. I'm the only daughter of the owner here. Technically, I'm an employee, so being here is allowed, okay?" I have heard her name before, and the story of the beautiful 25-year-old soul heiress was pretty well known. Yet, she worked at the hotel. My main job was cleaning the pool and recreational facilities, so we hadn't crossed paths before. "Oh, I'm so sorry, my bad." "It's fine. I haven't been to the poolside in a while either." From then on, Alyssa and I started chatting more often. It seemed Alyssa went to local college and only visited New York on trips. I casually mentioned that I moved from New York, which seemed to pique her interest. Alyssa was very friendly and easygoing. About a month after we met, when I was still addressing her as Ms. Smith, she corrected me saying, "You know the hotel CEO is also named Smith, right? Isn't it a bit confusing? Just call me Alyssa. We're around the same age and friends now, so there's no need for formalities, okay?" It felt a bit bold to drop the formalities, but now, 3 months since we met, I call her Alyssa. Ever since Alyssa and I got acquainted, she began showing up more frequently at the poolside. Always with a bright smile, seeing her would energize me to get for my workday. However, on a day in early July, Alyssa came by the pool, but her usual cheerful expression was nowhere to be seen. I was just about to take a break, so I guided Alyssa to the break area and offered her some cold drink. Even as she sat on the sofa, her face remained downcast. Wondering what had upset her, she finally broke the silence. "Can you help me convince my family?" "Huh? Convince? About what?" I was baffled, and seeing my confusion, Alyssa quickly added, "Oh, I'm sorry, I should have been clearer. I'm facing a dilemma and could really use some advice. It's for the sake of my family." As she shared her story, it turned out that Alyssa's grandmother had fallen ill. She had been battling the illness for a long time, and recently, The doctors had hinted that she might not have much longer. Her grandmother's dying wish was to meet Alyssa's future husband. But Alyssa isn't currently dating anyone. Thus, her parents had arranged a matchmaking date for her. However, according to Alyssa, she absolutely can't stand the guy they've set her up with. The thing is, that guy used to bully me when we were kids. I don't even want to see him again. Well, I've heard that those who've been bullied never forget, so it's not surprising. Why not tell your parents the truth about it? I tried, but they just brushed it off, saying it was just childhood stuff. I later suggested that she could go on the date and then gently decline, but Alyssa immediately dismissed that idea, not even wanting to see the guy's face. But Alyssa's parents had said, if Alyssa has a boyfriend, of course, we won't set up the matchmaking date. But you don't, do you? So why not just give it a shot? We want to see Grandma happy, and we're worried about your future. What do you think I should do? I understand my parents' concern for their unmarried daughter, and of course, I want to make Grandma happy. That's why I'm so lost about what to do. I pondered for a while. Convincing her parents seemed the right move, but if they aren't willing to listen, a bold move might be necessary. What about asking someone to pretend to be your boyfriend? Your parents did say if you had a boyfriend, they wouldn't arrange the date. At first, Alyssa stared blankly, but a few seconds later, her eyes were sparkling. That's it. And suddenly, she started taking off her clothes. Whoa, hold on, Alyssa. What are you doing? Seeing my panicked reaction, Alyssa burst into laughter. Silly, I'm wearing a swimsuit underneath. I'm so happy I feel like taking a slide. Amped up, Alyssa headed straight for the pool and swiftly went down the water slide. Her expressive enthusiasm was overwhelming, but even more distracting was the sight of her stunning bikini-clad figure. Then, with a big splash, Alyssa came down from the water slide into the pool below. But then, a little mishap occurred. Her bikini had shifted slightly out of place. It wasn't fully exposed, but instinctively, I covered my eyes with my hands. Seeing this, Alyssa casually remarked, "Oops," and quickly adjusted her bikini. As she approached the poolside, a thought seemed to strike her, and she looked over at me with a bright expression. With a sly smile, she asked, "Did you get a peek?" Recalling the earlier sight, I inadvertently replied, "Yes," but I quickly came to my senses. After all, I didn't actually see everything. No, I didn't see anything. I swear, I didn't see a thing. Amused by my flustered state, Alyssa pointed at me and firmly said, "Nope, you saw it. So now, you're going to play the role of my boyfriend." Of course, I tried coming up with several excuses to decline the boyfriend role, but Alyssa's decision was final. And then, 5 days later, I found myself introducing myself to Alyssa's parents as her boyfriend. Turns out, Alyssa's dad is the CEO of the company where I work part-time. Being just a part-timer, I had never met the CEO before. I was nervous, wondering what kind of person he'd be, but contrary to my imagination, Alyssa's dad was about 100 times more easygoing and cheerful. Alyssa's mom was a fantastic cook and had a gentle demeanor. Both were surprised that Alyssa was dating a part-timer like me, but these kind-hearted folks accepted me warmly without realizing I was a fake boyfriend. It seems they called off the matchmaking date. I had no idea she was dating a guy from our company. She's quite a handful. Well, please take care of her," her father said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. Her mother served her home-cooked meals, and although I was full, she kept saying, eat up," encouraging me to have more. Anyway, they were truly wonderful people. And I also met Alyssa's grandmother, who I heard was sick. Lately, she seemed to be feeling better, showing a more lively smile than expected, which was a relief for Alyssa. Alyssa's grandmother gently took my hand and caressed it. "Are you Alyssa's fiancé?" "Well, not exactly a fiancé. Given that I was just pretending to be her boyfriend, I was quite puzzled, but Alyssa came to my rescue. "Grandma, he's not a fiancé, he's my boyfriend." Alyssa's grandmother chuckled and nodded. Right, I forgot. It's great to meet you. Thank you for coming. And your name is?" "It's Jake." Upon hearing my name, her grandmother looked surprised and said, "Oh, are you from around here? I used to live in New York, but now I live in my grandmother's house, which is near a resort hotel." She listened with interest to my story. Could it be the house with the large cherry tree in the garden? I was taken aback by her words. It was true that there was a cherry tree in the garden. Considering it's a small town, maybe she knew my grandmother. I wanted to ask her about it, but before I could, Alyssa and her parents called me over. I didn't think it was a big deal, so I didn't pursue the topic further. After that, I had a pleasant time chatting with Alyssa's family. And just as I was about to leave, Alyssa's grandmother whispered something in my ear. You're not a real boyfriend, are you?" "What?" I was completely taken aback, realizing that our fake boyfriend plan had been exposed. "Haha, I can tell. Is it the wisdom of age or something? The way you and Alyssa interact, it seems a bit off. Did Alyssa ask you to do this for me and her parents?" "Well, yes." I foolishly nodded in agreement, but the grandmother was still smiling warmly at me. "I'm sorry for putting you in such a situation, but Alyssa is a really sweet girl. Please continue to be her friend, and I'm glad I got to meet you too." "Thank you, I'm sorry." It seemed that the grandmother had figured out that Alyssa had set up the fake boyfriend plan out of kindness. She didn't blame either of us. Afterwards, the grandmother told me to keep it a secret from Alyssa that she had figured it out, so I did. Though we managed to avoid the matchmaking meeting successfully, a few days later, during my day off, I received an unexpected call from Alyssa. My grandmother's condition has worsened, and she's been rushed to the hospital. I got a call from home. What should I do? I can't bear the thought if something happens to her. I had never heard Alyssa sound so panicked and on the verge of tears. "Calm down. Where are you now? I'll get a cab and come pick you up. Then we'll go to the hospital together." I couldn't let her go to the hospital alone in such a state, so I hailed a taxi. After picking up Alyssa, we hurried to the hospital where her grandmother had been taken. In the taxi, Alyssa, who seemed to have been holding back, started to break down and shed tears. She was so lively before. "It's not going to be our last goodbye today, is it? I'm scared. What do we do?" Alyssa's hands, resting on her lap, clenched tightly. I placed my hand over Alyssa's, trying to reassure her. "Everything will be all right. Plus, I'm here with you. You're not alone. It'll be okay." Throughout our drive to the hospital, I kept speaking comforting words to Alyssa. Once we arrived at the hospital, we couldn't see the grandmother right away. Throughout the day, the grandmother's condition didn't improve, and our days were filled with anxiety. During that time, I stayed close to Alyssa as much as possible. "Hey, Jake, I'm sorry for keeping you with me all the time. You must be tired, right? I think I can manage on my own now." Alyssa's face betrayed her attempt to be brave, showing her underlying fear. To begin with, I was happy that Alyssa rallied on me when her grandmother was taken to the hospital. If being by her side could ease Alyssa's worries even a little, I wanted to be there for her. "It's okay. I'm concerned about your grandmother and about you. I want to be here." With those words, I stayed by Alyssa's side. 3 days after the hospitalization, the grandmother's condition finally stabilized, and we were allowed to visit. Right after the visit, the grandmother looked frail, which made me anxious. However, as the days passed, she began to recover, and by the end of 2 weeks, she had regained her cheerful smile. The doctor told us that the worst was over, and the likelihood of her condition worsening abruptly was low. One day, during our visit, the grandmother looked at Alyssa and me and gave us a mischievous smile. Then she said, "You two, Things are going well, huh? At that, both Alyssa and I blushed. In fact, since Alyssa's grandmother was hospitalized, I realized I wanted to be there for Alyssa, to support and protect her. So after hearing from the doctor that her grandmother's condition had stabilized, I confessed my feelings to Alyssa. It turned out Alyssa felt the same way about me, and we had just started dating a few days ago. It seems there's no keeping secrets from the old lady. Haha, you two make a lovely pair. Instead of just being a boyfriend, I'd love for you to be my grandson-in-law soon. Besides, if you're Terry's grandson, I'm sure you'd make Alyssa happy. Hearing that, I was taken aback. I remembered the sound of the name Terry. A few of my grandmother Theris's friends had referred to her as Terry during her funeral. Alyssa seemed just as surprised. Who's Terry? Jake's grandmother. Wait, do you know Jake's grandmother? Alyssa's grandmother nodded emphatically. Of course I do. As the story went, my grandmother Theresa and Alyssa's grandmother had been childhood friends. Both were born and raised in the same small town in Nebraska and later married there. Even in their golden years, they frequently met up for coffee and chats. Alyssa's grandmother often heard stories from my grandmother about her adorable grandson. Embarrassingly, my grandmother would tell Alyssa's grandmother things like, "My grandson wouldn't hurt a fly, and he sends me flowers on my birthday. Isn't he sweet?" Hearing those stories, I remembered my beloved grandmother Theris's gentle smile. Unfortunately, during my grandmother's funeral, Alyssa's grandmother had been unwell. So she had never met me. We used to joke that it would be nice if our grandchildren got married someday. It's like a dream come true for me and Terry. Thanks to you too, she chuckled. We exchanged a glance and shared a laugh. Neither of us had known that our grandmothers were childhood friends, but we both realized that we had been recipients of their love, which warmed our hearts. Some time later, Alyssa's grandmother passed away. It was a sad time, but in her last moments, she wore a contented smile, surrounded by her family. I felt blessed to have been accepted as part of the family to bid her farewell. I then started working full-time at Alyssa's father's resort, having started out as a part-timer. Being seen as a potential future son-in-law, I've been put through the ringer every day. Watching me push myself to the limit, Alyssa always greets me with a bright smile. You used to just coast through when you were part-timing, remember? Now, your expression is completely different. It makes me so happy thinking you're doing all this for our future together. Hearing her say that, I feel like she's become even more radiant lately. That's another reason I'm so driven in my job. I want to become a man worthy of standing by her side. Once I feel I've truly come into my own, I plan to propose to Alyssa and get married. When that day comes, Alyssa and I intend to visit the graves of our grandmothers and give them our heartfelt update. I'm sure both of them would be overjoyed about our marriage. So, how did you find today's story? Your subscription and a thumbs up would be a great encouragement for our content creation. We're looking forward to your comments as well. See you in the next video. Let's start from where we left off last time. Right here. Before I knew it, she came up behind me, taking the coffee cup from my hand, and looked at me with moist eyes. My heart raced. Everything that had happened with her, it all started that night. Robert Thompson. Just as I was about to sit on the waiting room couch, my name was called. The voice sounded somewhat curt. Was it because I was late for my scheduled time? It's not like I wanted to be late. I told them in advance I'd leave on time because I had a dentist appointment, but my manager, Amy, held me back. She always does this on purpose. Darn that female boss, Amy. I rushed into the examination room, where the dentist was impatiently looking at my X-ray. It's not a cavity. It's not. While sitting on the examination chair, I blurted out in surprise. The pain in your tooth is due to clenching. It's not just grinding your teeth while you sleep, but you're constantly clenching your teeth unconsciously. Are you under any stress at work or something? He hit the nail on the head. I'll give you some painkillers again, but be aware and try not to clench your teeth. I was stunned. So, when humans feel stressed, they have a habit of clenching their teeth, and clenching them constantly can cause them to ache. Most of my stress comes from my female boss, Amy. After all, she has the mentality that a subordinate's success is her success, but their failures are their own. She throws a fit if things don't go her way, and she constantly nitpicks. She has a knack for making snide remarks to subordinates she doesn't like. The fact that my toothache might be because of the boss. The dentist's office was on the 3rd floor of a 27-story mixed-use building located nearby my office. I finished my checkup just after 7:30 in the evening. I waited for the elevator, planning to eat dinner in the underground food court. Unusually, there was no one else around. When the descending elevator arrived, "Is the first floor okay for you?" I wanted to say basement floor, but what came out was a simple yes. She probably works for a company located in this building. We had shared the elevator a few times before. She's a stunning beauty. I mean, drop-dead gorgeous. She always stands by the control panel, holding the open button for everyone to get on and off, then quickly presses the close button before exiting. I had secretly nicknamed her Elevator Lady, and always looked forward to catching a glimpse of her in the elevator. But I never expected to run into her after my dentist appointment, and to have a moment alone with her. I found myself wishing the elevator would just stop for some reason, when suddenly I felt a strong jolt from below. It's an earthquake. The elevator has actually stopped. The lights went out, and the emergency lights turned on. At the same time, my right arm was suddenly yanked tight. She, in her shock, had grabbed onto my bicep with both her hands. I was frozen, unable to move, just standing there. It felt like a long time. But in reality, it was only a few seconds, maybe several. Then, the elevator began moving again, stopping at the nearest floor and the doors opened. "It's okay now, let's get out." She quickly let go of my arm. Then, blushing, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry," and gave a nod. We both exited the elevator side by side. She nodded again and began to walk away. "Excuse me." Before I could think, I had called out to her. She stopped and looked back at me, and I said, If you'd like, maybe we could grab a meal together." She looked puzzled and tilted her head. "You know, since we both got scared, but I guess that's a bit forward, isn't it?" I felt like I was about to burst into flames. I've never tried picking up anyone before. "Do you think the restaurants are still open?" After that quake. And so, we headed to the underground food court. The places were still operating as usual. Wanting to impress, I chose an upscale-looking sushi restaurant. "I'm sorry about earlier." "Hut, for what?" "For grabbing onto your arm." "Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal." She continued, a little shyly, with a smile on her face. "It's been a while since I did that. I used to do it all the time as a kid. I would just cling onto anyone without thinking, but when I was 6 or 7, I got separated from my parents at a fair. I thought I was holding onto my dad's pants in the crowd, but it turned out to be a stranger." "So, you got lost because of that?" When I asked, she replied, "Yes, it was a college-aged guy. He took me to a lost children's area and stayed with me until my parents came. I clung to his arm the whole time." I started to say, "You must have been," but I caught my words, hinting that she must have been adorable. My dad scolded me a lot afterward. He said grabbing people's arms like that is a sign of being spoiled. Don't rely on others. Stand on your own 2 feet, he told me, and that's when I tried to break the habit of clinging to people. So, was today the first time since then? Curious, I asked, and she playfully responded, who knows, but anyway, I'm glad I wasn't alone, and she smiled warmly. After that, the conversation drifted to a recent visit to the dentist because of a toothache that wasn't a cavity. We also talked about how our work stress must definitely be because of our bosses. Before I realized it, I was talking more than I usually did. It's not just my current boss. Ever since I was born, there's always been a woman in a position above me. My sisters are 5 and 3 years older than me, and throughout elementary, middle, and high school, all my teachers were women. Even at my part-time jobs, all my bosses have been women. Are you afraid of women or something? No, I don't see it that way. It's just that. Just what? Back in my school days, I had this female friend. She'd often invite me out to drink and stuff. I'd get my hopes up, thinking something might happen, but in the end, she'd say something like, "You are just a safe bet to me." She listened to my light-hearted story with a smile on her face. Every once in a while, she'd brush her hair behind her ear with her right hand. I noticed a small mole on the back of her hand, right around where the base of her thumb is. "Are you sure you're okay with it?" She had suggested splitting the bill, but I declined, saying, "I was the one who invited you." We had forgotten to even exchange names. I couldn't tell her that I'd seen her around before. "Thank you so much for today, and for treating me to dinner." "No problem. Thank you too." She walked toward the train station, looking back and waving 2 or 3 times. Each time, I wanted to call out to her. I wanted to stop her and exchange contact details. But I thought, maybe I'd be bothering her or she might reject me. With those thoughts, I couldn't muster the courage to speak up. Waving back was all I could manage. Anyway, I'll see her again in the elevator like always. That's what I reassured myself with internally. And as I watched her leave, I realized I was clenching my teeth. Simultaneously, the words of my dentist echoed in my mind. Be conscious not to clench your teeth. From then on, with a strong desire to meet her again, I'd find reasons to slip out of work and head to that building next to our office. But for some reason, I never bumped into her in the elevator again. Then, one day, "Hey, Robert." While I was working on an urgent task at my desk, I was called by the laid-back voice of Amy. When I reached her office, "You're being transferred to our subsidiary." Amy, with a faint smile, handed me the notice of my job reassignment. "Look, it's that underperforming company. Being sent to such a low-level company, I really feel for you, but maybe it's just right for someone like you. Anyway, use that little brain of yours and make sure the handover is smooth, okay?" My successor was a man from the department next to mine, newly hired mid-career. When the handover process began, he was quick to grasp things and had a pleasant demeanor. He was also fairly well received by our clients. My only concern was that he seemed a bit timid. 2 weeks later, I started at the subsidiary I was assigned to. The commute took about 20 minutes longer than before, but it was manageable. However, because I was unfamiliar with the train line, I barely made it on time that day. Panting, I rushed into the building's elevator. Our office was on the 7th floor. As I reached to press the elevator button for the 7th floor, I noticed the light for that floor was already lit. Going to the 7th floor, I was addressed by a woman standing in front of the control panel. I replied with a nod and looked up at her. What? Why? It was her, the woman from that night of the earthquake. It was a small building. Each floor was occupied by just one company. I've been working for the company on this floor for about a month now. Oh, really? Are you Robert, by any chance? Yes. I had heard someone was being sent here from the parent company. I finally understood the situation from what she said. For a moment, I was taken aback, thinking, could such a coincidence really happen? I'm Emily, the head of Sales Division 1, Team 3 at your new assignment. Unbelievable. She was my new boss. I later found out that the company I was transferred to had business dealings with the company she had worked for until a month ago. Her previous company was a small one, just a tad bigger than a sole proprietorship. The owner of that company had gotten old and decided to shut it down. So, my new company recognized her talents and recruited her. After you. When the elevator reached the 7th floor, she pressed the close button and motioned for me to exit first. Feeling a bit embarrassed, I caught her giving me a warm smile. Thus began my new chapter in life, but our relationship remained strictly professional. Then, one day, she uncharacteristically raised her voice on the phone, saying things like, "That's why it's impossible. At the very least, you need to go through HR." Before hanging up, I approached her with some documents I needed to submit and asked, "Is everything okay?" "No, it's nothing major. I'm sorry for raising my voice." She was clearly flustered. I was curious, but I didn't press further and left her office. At that moment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a call from a colleague from my old department. I stepped out into the hallway to answer. "Yes, this is Rob. Hey, we've got a situation here." Despite saying it's serious, that voice sounded oddly amused. "Weren't you having a phone dispute over there just now?" Yeah, kinda. The boss called. That guy Jack, he up and quit the company." Jack was my successor, and I was concerned about his timid nature. So the boss lady is fuming, yelling, "What's going on? How can he be so irresponsible? Doesn't anyone know? Guess it's your fault, huh?" It was the first I'd heard that Jack had become the boss's target. "Yeah, he took over right from you." I genuinely felt bad for him, but as I was wondering why the boss had called in the first place, my former colleague explained. "Since he left so suddenly, we don't have anyone to fill his spot, so they tried to bring you back here for the time being, but you turned them down flat. Amy is steaming mad right now." It all clicked, and I went back into the room. Our eyes met. I felt the need to thank her and gave a nod of appreciation. It didn't take me long to adjust to the new workplace. Perhaps due to the absence of the previous stressors, even my toothache ceased to bother me. Most importantly, work became fun. Of course, because seeing Emily at work was a highlight. And she truly was a catch, always efficient at her job, and providing clear instructions to us, her subordinates. Yet, she never acted arrogant. A stark contrast to that bossy lady back at my old place. The vulnerable image I had of her from that night of the earthquake was nowhere to be found. My secret feelings for her only grew. But I thought they were just unattainable dreams. However, oh, my wallet. On my way home from work and about to hop on the subway, I realized I forgot my wallet at the office. In a rush, I headed back to the company to find Emily there alone. Elbows on the desk and her head cradled in her hands. "You are still here?" "Oh, yeah, just lost in thought." "What brings you back, Robert?" "Left my wallet." "I see." I grabbed my forgotten wallet from the drawer and asked her if she was leaving soon. "Maybe I should." "Wait up. Let's head out together." With that, the two of us got in the elevator. "I hope it doesn't get stuck again," she murmured, looking up at the elevator's floor indicator. When I turned to her, she was already looking at me. "Is it okay?" I wasn't sure what she meant by okay. The next moment, she suddenly gripped my arm tightly. Much like that night of the earthquake. But this time, even after we stepped out of the elevator and began walking, she didn't let go of my arm. My previous company was a small place. I was persuaded to join this one, but being a manager and leading people, it's quite a challenge. It seems that even she, who always appears confident at work, feels the pressure. How about grabbing some dinner? I was thinking the same, but I have two conditions. Suddenly, she let go of my arm and took on a serious demeanor, just like at work. What are they? We'll split the bill. Okay. And no sushi places. Got it. She shrugged and let out a soft chuckle. Actually, I'm not a fan of raw fish. So, you pushed yourself that other night. Yes, I thought, why not? You treated me after all. We both laughed heartily. As we laughed, she grabbed my arm again, resting her head on my shoulder. She chose a barbecue place near the station. A man and a woman, just the two of us, at a barbecue joint. My heart raced, but she seemed completely unbothered. First, we toasted with draft beers. I glanced at her right hand as she held her mug. I was staring at a mole near the base of her thumb on the back of her hand. What? She noticed where I was looking and seemed puzzled. Oh, that mole on your hand. Yeah, I've been self-conscious about it before. What about the mole? Well, actually, me too. Saying this, I showed her the palm of my left hand. Look, right here. Oh my. On the palm of my left hand, I also had a mole near the base of my thumb. She laid her right hand over my extended left one. It's a perfect match, almost the same spot. See, she playfully looked at our overlapping hands and said, matching the lines of our palms, it's like fate or something. She made a cheeky face, sticking out her tongue in jest. And so, we began dating. Of course, we never mixed our personal and professional lives. However, our colleagues seemed to have had an inkling about us. Then, about a year and a half later, an unexpected announcement was made. Firstly, the head of the department I was previously in, Manager Williams. The HR department, concerned about the high turnover rate of employees under her direct supervision, conducted interviews and found out about Amy's arrogant behavior. She was removed from her director position and relegated to a less significant role. Then, Emily was chosen as her successor. Transferring from a subsidiary, it was truly a promotion for her. I was chosen to fill Emily's previous role. From tomorrow, we'll be in different departments at work. We can't help it. Anyway, let's start from where we left off the other day. Here, now. Why not? She smiled mischievously. I couldn't suppress the bubbling feelings anymore. Once she sets her mind on something, she won't listen. She took the coffee cup from my hand. I extended my now empty left hand towards her. She placed her right hand over mine. Our palm lines match. It's like fate. The toaster dinged. That's it for now. The toast is ready. Darn. She and I took turns cooking. That day, it was my turn to prepare breakfast, so I was in the kitchen. We had started living together. By the way, the reason we were moved to separate departments is the company's policy that married couples can't be in the same department. Yes. We were newlyweds, fresh into our marriage. Let's continue from where we left off. Come on, let's. My beloved Emily was repeatedly trying to get my attention. Naturally, I presented the palm of my left hand in front of Emily. Then, Emily playfully slapped it away. What's the matter? Still half asleep. It was Emily's voice that made me realize I'd dozed off and had been dreaming of our newlywed days. The sensation of Emily's hand tapping mine brought me back to reality. About the other day, I mumbled, and Emily picked up on it. She gently placed her right hand over my left. Look at us, we've sure aged, haven't we? She looked at her hand with wrinkle and smiled. We've been married for almost 20 years now. Oh, found another gray hair. Let me continue from the other day. Saying that, she began plucking out my gray hairs. It was just after 3 days since she found the gray hairs. The cold demeanor of the elite female doctor melted away, revealing a vulnerable woman. "I need you," she whispered. Unable to resist her heartfelt plea, My name is Kyle, and I'll be turning 36 this year. I work as a freelance writer. Leveraging my previous experience as a doctor, I now write about medical topics. There's a good demand for my work, so I'm not in urgent need of work. Up until 3 years ago, I worked as a doctor at a university hospital. I don't like to brag, but I was quite popular among the patients. I believe I was the best surgeon among my peers. But these days, I've distanced myself from my old friends from medical school and my time as a doctor. To be frank, I don't want to see them. Many colleagues look down on me for leaving the university hospital. I know they say behind my back that I ran away from the demanding environment. Even though my salary has dropped significantly since then, I'm quite content with my current job and lifestyle. Then, out of the blue, I received news that my old mentor had passed away. A friend informed me that Professor Johnson, a mentor of mine from my college days, had passed away. For a moment, the news left me speechless. To me, Professor Johnson was not just a mentor but also someone I had a complicated history with. A friend asked, "You're coming to the funeral, right?" I hesitated for a moment but managed to reply, "I will." Professor Johnson was a devout Catholic. The funeral was originally supposed to be held at the church Professor Johnson attended, but due to the large expected turnout, it was moved to a funeral home in New York City. Still, many priests and nuns were present, and the funeral mass went on without a hitch. I wasn't familiar with the hymns and was attending a Catholic funeral for the first time, so I just followed the crowd. Many of the faces at the funeral were friends and colleagues I'd been avoiding, making me feel out of place. Some were whispering and glancing in my direction. I think I was the first of my college classmates to leave the front lines of medicine early. Most of my peers are still working hard as doctors. I decided to leave as soon as the funeral was over. I somewhat regretted attending, feeling this wasn't where I belonged. As I lay flowers on Professor Johnson lying in his coffin, I recall a conversation I once had with the professor. It was the talk that had pushed me to leave the university hospital. I always wanted to ask him what he really meant by those words. And even now, those feelings hadn't changed. After the funeral, I watched as Professor Johnson's coffin was taken away. The funeral's main mourner was Professor Johnson's wife. Our eyes met, and I gave a slight nod. She smiled kindly at me. Suddenly, a voice behind me snapped, "Look, who finally showed up. The very man who betrayed Professor Johnson." I was grabbed by the shoulder and forcibly turned around. It was a former colleague and classmate from college. Now a top surgeon at the university hospital, Emily. She had been a close friend during our time at the university hospital, and my ex-girlfriend. Her eyes were red, probably from crying. But her face was filled more with anger than sadness. And that anger was directed at me. I felt her grip tighten. I was more concerned about her hurting her hand than the pain I felt. Her right hand is the hand that saves many patients. She's not just any random right-hand woman. If you exert that much force, you'll hurt your finger. Emily's eyes widened at my words. The next moment, she forcefully removed her hand from my shoulder. "Why bring this up now? Go back to the countryside, you loser." Pushing away our mutual friends who tried to intervene, Emily hurled insults at me. Coward, loser, deserter, irresponsible, I've heard them all before. I felt like laughing at the absurdity, hurriedly covering my mouth with my hand. The more seriously Emily cursed me, the more ridiculous I felt. "It's okay to scold me, but don't you have anything else to say, Emily? I'm tired of hearing the same things." Even though I knew I was provoking her, my sarcastic tone remained unchanged. Emily's face turned bright red with anger and embarrassment. She had always been like this. Always trying to do the right thing, always taking patients seriously. But her strict attitude towards both herself and others often led to misunderstandings. The harder she tried, the less patients liked her, leaving her isolated at work. Yet, her spirit and ideals never wavered. She probably didn't realize that her diligent attitude, without any arrogance about her own skills, was almost suffocating for me. I looked at Emily, who was glaring at me while breathing heavily, with pity. She never doubts that what she knows is the only truth. I find Emily's candor like that annoying. Raising your voice and causing a scene here. Is this the education my father provided? If so, he failed as an educator. The one who broke the tense atmosphere between me and Emily was a woman with a deep, commanding voice. All eyes turned to her. A woman wearing a black morning dress and a veiled top hat stood there. Wearing a top hat meant she was a relative of Professor Johnson. I recalled, she's the professor's only daughter. Wait, what? I understood that she was Professor Johnson's daughter, but I was taken aback. I thought I was meeting her for the first time, but underneath that black veil was a familiar face. Then I remembered that her last name was also Johnson. "Kyle, thank you for attending my father's funeral." The woman, who addressed me in a monotone without bowing, was Ava Johnson, whom I often saw at the publishing company building. Although we wrote in completely different genres, we both freelanced for the publisher and often met at related parties. Ava, famous among us writers for her audacity, unconventional approach, and beauty, was someone I'd occasionally grab a drink with. "What? Ava is Professor Johnson's problematic daughter." Unable to contain my surprise, I blurted out. Ava frowned, replying, "Choose your words carefully. Why didn't you tell me sooner? You never asked." The fact that Professor Johnson's only daughter was famous among his students for being a problem child. Professor Johnson occasionally complained about her. Professor Johnson, who was adored as a personable professor, was often asked by his students what kind of person his only daughter was, whom he could not handle. Who would have thought my writer friend, Ava, was that very person? "Ah, so you're the professor's daughter. I've heard quite a bit about you." Emily's face couldn't quite hide her irritation as she greeted, with a sense of doing it out of obligation. After all, she's the daughter of our mentor. We couldn't afford to be rude. Ava stared at Emily with an emotionless expression. "Emily, right. My father often mentioned you were an excellent surgeon. It's our first time meeting, isn't it?" Ava's overly polite response seemed incredibly condescending to me, who knew her usual demeanor very well. Without a doubt, Ava was mocking Emily. "This is between him and me. It has nothing to do with you, young lady, does it?" Kyle is my friend. I'm not the type to stand by and watch a friend get wrongly blamed." Ava replied with a sly smile, tilting her head slightly. "I know her all too well. The angrier she gets, the more she smiles." And I was sure that she didn't step between Emily and me for my sake. "It's not about blaming him. I just want Kyle to come back to the university hospital." Professor Johnson had always hoped for that too. He always cared about Kyle. Hearing Emily's words, old memories became vivid in my mind. It was back when I worked at the university hospital. Emily and I, once lovers, both strived and pushed forward in our careers as doctors, I believe. I took pride in my work. I have grown accustomed to being called doctor by my patients. Professor Johnson looked unusually downcast that day. His face was gloomy, devoid of his usual smile. Concerned, I asked, "Is everything all right?" Professor Johnson murmured, "It's about my daughter. She has both the ability and academic performance to become a doctor, but she's adamant about not taking the medical school entrance exam." He said she has a nightly battle with her mother, who tells her to apply to medical school. To be honest, I'm fine with either decision. I've even considered adopting a son-in-law, but she's against that idea too. What should I do? The Johnsons has been famous for being a family of doctors for generations. He choked on his words, saying that it would be a shame to end it in his generation. I can't understand what's so bad about becoming a doctor. It's beyond my understanding. I carelessly blurted out. Professor Johnson looked at me a little surprised. A hint of surprise in his eyes, and then his expression hardened. I now realize how arrogant I was back then. Being constantly addressed as doctor and revered by my patients, I felt like my job was superior to others. I was intoxicated with the idea of saving lives. Thinking too highly of myself. Professor Johnson didn't miss the arrogance in my heart. "Kyle, one day you might face challenges in this medical profession. It won't be just your problem. It might also affect the patients whose lives are in your hands." Confused, I couldn't grasp what Professor Johnson was trying to convey. Seeing that his words weren't getting through to me, he let out a deep sigh. I was aware I had disappointed him, but I couldn't figure out exactly why. However, it is hard to understand which words and which attitude disappointed the professor so much. "You're bound to stumble. You should leave before that happens." He left me with those words. Only when he turned the corner of the hallway did I realize he meant I should leave the hospital. I was considered one of the top students among Professor Johnson's mets, and he had told me to leave. More than shock, anger bubbled up. For the first time, I felt a clear resentment towards Professor Johnson. Carrying that anger, I went on with my afternoon appointments. And that day turned into a storm of complaints. Of course it did. I think I unfairly took out my frustration on a patient. I wonder where my calm self went, drowning in self-loathing. Over the weekend, I handed in my resignation. Watching Emily work and comparing with myself, I realized I was no longer needed at this hospital. I was deeply impressed by Emily, who, despite being called a top-tier doctor, humbly and earnestly tried to save her patients. Perhaps Professor Johnson was concerned about me for that very reason. Emily wants me back at the hospital, but I believe Professor Johnson didn't feel the same way. "Emily, you're lying, right? I bet Professor Johnson never said he wanted me back." Upon hearing my words, Emily looked surprised, saying, "Oh." For the first time, I explained to Emily why I left the university hospital. I told her that it was Professor Johnson's words that made me realize I shouldn't be a doctor. Both Emily and my colleagues listened to my confession with bated breath. I left the hospital because I was sick of my own immaturity as a doctor and as a person. Even after hearing the truth, Emily couldn't accept it and kept arguing with me. I'm tired of hearing her repeated why and how come. Professor Johnson just wanted to motivate you. You misunderstood him. Come back to the hospital. Let's start over, okay? Emily, unable to accept what I said, was desperate to persuade me. I'm right, and you're wrong. It seemed to be written on Emily's face that this was why she had to make it right. Ava watched Emily expressionlessly. Suddenly, Ava shifted her gaze from Emily to me. Our eyes met instantly. Ava smiled slyly when our eyes locked. "We are students of Professor Johnson. Be proud and confident," Emily exclaimed, almost shouting. "I get it. My father was a respectable doctor and professor, but he got sick and couldn't beat the disease." Ava's words took Emily by surprise. All the proud and brilliant students couldn't save my father. Ava threw those harsh words at Emily. Ava is trying to verbally overpower Emily. I've heard that when Professor Johnson collapsed, Emily was the one on duty that night. The person most regretful about not being able to save Professor Johnson's life was Emily herself. Emily bit her lower lip, to which Ava smiled faintly. Your dedication and emergency treatment were admirable, but that's it. My father passed away. Faced with this brutal reality, Emily seemed to want to cover her ears. Her body was shaking slightly. But he can't even do that, Ava said slowly, pointing at me. If Professor Johnson had been brought in, could I have treated him? I'm sure I won't be able to stay calm. I might have panicked and run away. Feeling exposed, I was lost for words. I'm a coward. Still, that's why I'm scared of facing the medical field on my own. I want your support. I was taken aback by the sight of Emily that I had never seen before. I need you. Those were Emily's true feelings. She collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to comfort her, but I felt I wasn't worthy. Crying, Emily kept saying, I want you to be with me. Looking down at her with a smile, Ava watched her. Then, making sure Emily didn't notice, Ava gently kicked my leg, urging my indecisive self. After that kick, Ava silently walked towards the exit. Her back was straight, showing no hesitation. It felt as though she displayed a genuine strength, unlike the facade shown by Emily. I gently knelt beside Emily, speaking to her softly. I offered her the most comforting words I could muster. I can support you from afar, and I'll always be watching over you. It had been 7 years since Professor Johnson passed away. There wasn't any specific memorial service, so all I could do was offer a silent prayer in my heart. In front of me sat Emily, aged gracefully over those 7 years, with a smile. I turned on my voice recorder and began the interview. Recently, Emily had successfully performed one of the world's most challenging surgeries. The fact that she was a female surgeon of Canadian descent was making headlines. I never went back to the university hospital. Instead, I continued my career as a freelance medical writer. After Professor Johnson's funeral, I think my relationship with Emily improved a bit. Emily never again told me to come back to the hospital, and I began interviewing my former classmates and colleagues from the university without any avoidance. Many doctors confided in me, telling me stories they wouldn't share with other writers. I had become quite valued among publishers. This time, Emily agreed to give me an exclusive interview. No other publishers or writers had managed to interview her firsthand. Your reputation has changed a lot after the surgery, hasn't it? Upon my question, Emily nodded slightly with a troubled expression. While she was glad to be recognized, she didn't want the excessive attention. She wanted to prioritize her time with her patients rather than being tied up with too many interviews and such. She stated this in her typical straightforward manner. I didn't achieve this with my strength alone. It feels like there was some kind of trigger, right? With a casual demeanor, I questioned her. Emily gave me a brief, sharp look. I pretended not to notice and smiled back. Yes, my classmate who got scared and fled the scene, and the daughter of my mentor who harshly criticized me. These two fueled my competitive spirit. I clawed my way up, telling them not to underestimate me. While she was smiling, her eyes weren't. It seemed she held a deep grudge about that time. I responded with a detached tone that must have been tough and proceeded with the interview. I talked for nearly an hour and the interview was over. The moment I turned off my voice recorder, Emily said, "I'm beat," stretching out big. You didn't have to be so formal in your answers, you know. When I said this to the seemingly tense Emily, she responded, I couldn't just take it lightly. I mean, who knows what you're going to write? When she becomes casual, it feels like we're back in our college days in an instant. By the way, I met Ava recently. Emily said this with a somewhat troubled smile. It seems she bumped into Ava when she visited Professor Johnson's grave the other day. At that time, Ava talked about why she had said certain things during the funeral. Seems she wanted to bring me down to hell. Her plan worked perfectly, Emily said, taking a sip from her now cold coffee. Why, if it's related to Professor Johnson, that's more than just holding a grudge. I raised my voice when I learned that Ava had intentionally attacked Emily. Back then, I defended Ava's rude behavior, thinking she was just distraught over losing her father. Well, about that. With a wry smile, Emily told me the truth that Ava had shared. She couldn't stand the girl who lived with the boy she liked. Wait, what? Caught off guard by this unexpected twist, I replied in surprise. I never noticed any signs that Ava had feelings for me. And certainly not now. Has it always been just me in your heart? Emily asked, pointing at my chest. For the past 7 years, no, probably since we broke up. That's how I've felt deep inside. This feeling that I have been hiding inside me for a long time. We've been stubborn, but it seems like it's time for us to move on. Ava, you know, she's a genius at reading people. Don't praise another woman when one's confessing her feelings to you with all her heart. Emily puffed up her cheeks. She was just like the Emily I dated in college. It was a nostalgic side of Emily. We sure took the long way round. I feel like we can walk through life together from now on. Now, how should I convey this to Emily? I carefully chose my words, wanting to tell her just that. Hope you enjoyed this. Subscribing to our channel will be a great encouragement for us. See you in the next video. My name is Jake. I'm a 36-year-old single man. Ever since I graduated from an elite private college, I've been working at the same company. My workplace is a major corporation with excellent benefits and a generous salary. I'm currently holding a manager position, and I'm truly grateful for it. I want to continue working with dedication and love for my company. Some hear my title and say, "You must be popular with the ladies," but in reality, I've never had a girlfriend my entire life. Honestly, I've always admired women and longed for marriage. But after an incident 20 years ago, I've been hesitant about love. I really like you, Jake. Will you go out with me? At 16, I was called behind the school by a girl I liked, and she confessed her feelings. I felt on top of the world hearing those words. I couldn't believe such a cute girl liked me. Shaking with joy, I responded with a big smile. "Oh, thank you. I've always liked you too. Yes, let's date." But the next moment, I felt like I was thrown from heaven to hell. Gotcha. Prank successful. This is hilarious. Suddenly, a group of other girls appeared from behind the school. The moment I heard the word of prank, everything became clear. This confession was just a prank. Seriously, spare me. Even as a joke, confessing to Jake is so creepy. She said this, looking truly disgusted. Her words froze me in shock. Ignoring my reaction, the girls laughed so hard. It must have been hilarious for them to prank a plain and unimpressive guy like me. This became a popular joke at school, and I was the butt of everyone's laughter. It might have been a fun story for everyone else, but it deeply hurt me. That incident left a deep scar on my heart, and even 20 years later, the trauma from that time still torments me. My coworkers, concerned about me, tried setting up group dates and introducing me to women. But in the end, none of it ever worked out. Even when I finally had a woman in front of me, the shock of that day came back to haunt me, and I was unable to express my feelings properly. I always felt that if I said something, I'd just be ridiculed again. Of course, I know this is just me being paranoid, and I'm probably overthinking things. Nevertheless, it was still difficult to regain confidence once lost. I guess love just isn't for me. I've tried telling myself this, thinking I should just give up on everything. But the recent death of my father made me rethink my family again. Apparently, my father had always been worried about my future. If someone wasn't interested in relationships, or if they were committed bachelors, then there's probably no need to force marriage. But if deep down I wanted to start a family, then maybe I should give it another shot to avoid any regrets. Just as I was contemplating this, my mom suggested arranged dating. Our family, partly because my grandfather was a town council chairman, was regarded as a respected land-owning family in the community. This might be why such a proposal came my way. "Jake, would you consider going on a matchmaking date? We got an invitation from a relative." I felt as if someone had seen right through my heart, and I was taken aback. Maybe my dad up in heaven arranged this because he's worried about me. That's how I chose to interpret it. "Thank you, yeah, I'll give it a shot." My mom seemed surprised by my response, not expecting me to agree. But at the same time, she looked pleased and enthusiastically helped me prepare for the date. And so, the day of the date came. I met the woman in a hotel lounge. Hi, I'm Jake, facing my date, a lady named Emily. I was incredibly nervous. Not just because I'm not great with women, but also because Emily turned out to be even more stunning than I had imagined. "Nice to meet you, I'm Emily." Judging by Emily's reaction, my fears were confirmed. She looked at me with an uninterested, expressionless face. But I guess that's to be expected. From what I heard, Emily is the daughter of the president of a listed company. She currently works as a full-time employee at her father's company. It's hard to imagine that a beautiful woman like her, who's also a CEO's daughter, would find someone like me suitable. I'm not what you'd call handsome, nor am I particularly witty or interesting. My job at a major company probably doesn't impress her, given her background. It's clear from Emily's expression that she's not too interested. "Well, it's really nice out today, isn't it?" "Yes, it's a clear sky." Still, I tried to lighten the mood by making small talk about things like the weather. Even if it wasn't all that entertaining, Emily responded without ignoring me, always with politeness. Just as you'd expect from a CEO's daughter. No matter how mundane the conversation was, she was thoroughly polite. However, the more beautiful and polite Emily was, the more downhearted I felt. This date is a total bust. An hour into the date, I took the check and said, "Thank you for today," to Emily. "It was fun. Hope we can meet again." Emily said this too, but it was probably just being nice. I kept stumbling over my words, and Emily's reactions seemed distant. It was hard to say we had a fun chat. "Jake, how was the matchmaking date?" After the date, the matchmaker asked me this, and I shared my honest feelings. Emily is absolutely stunning, way too good for someone like me, but I'm not great at conversation, and it seemed she didn't enjoy herself. "I think we're not a match." "Really?" Emily said she had a good time. The matchmaker mentioned this, but it was likely just a polite gesture. In reality, I hadn't heard from Emily since, and there's been no progress. Love just isn't meant for me. I thought I'd never see Emily again, but later, I'd have a surprising reunion with her. Starting today, a new employee has been assigned to our department. I hope we can all help each other to train her. Director Steve mentioned this while introducing the new employee, and to my surprise, it was Emily. I was taken aback by this unexpected development. Why on earth would the CEO's daughter transfer to our company? "My name is Emily Smith. I'm sure I might cause some inconvenience as I'm still learning, but I kindly ask for your guidance." Saying this, Emily gave a respectful nod. The male employees seemed to be heartened by the fact that she was quite beautiful. However, I was overwhelmed with anxiety, almost panicking. At the failed matchmaking event, I'm sure Emily had formed a negative impression of me. Working in the same department now, what was I supposed to do? But, to my astonishment, Emily approached me during lunch break. "Hi, Jake. It's been a while." Even though I thought our relationship ended after that awkward date, seeing Emily again made my heart race uncontrollably. She was that captivating. But I tried to keep a straight face, not letting her notice my feelings. "Oh, hi Emily. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd see you here at this company." "Yes, about that. Actually, my father asked me to get some hands-on experience. As you can see, I'm not the best at communicating, so he told me to train at another company." Wow, I was shocked hearing Emily's confession. Honestly, I thought I'd never see her again. And to think I'd end up working at the same company like this. That matchmaking date didn't go well at all, and just being with me must have been quite the ordeal for Emily. And yet, she came to this company for training. Her father must be quite strict, I guess. While I was still grappling with my feelings, Emily, with her ever-calm demeanor, continued to explain. "It was a decision made between my father and the company. Only you are aware of this situation to ensure the other employees don't feel uneasy or obliged. So, please keep this between us. I understand. I'm nervous about this new environment, but if you are here, I feel reassured. I hope we can get along well from now on." Saying that, Emily gave an awkward smile and went back to her work. Even now, despite Emily's polite manner of speaking, she was giving off a distant and cold impression. I had the feeling that she might have forced herself to talk to me, which made me feel uncomfortable. Maybe Emily thinks I have something on her. Perhaps she's worried I might blurt out to everyone that she's the CEO's daughter. So, I decided to reassure Emily. "Look, Emily, I promise I won't ever spill your secret to anyone. You don't have to be so cautious around me." "Huh? What are you talking about?" "Just that. You don't have to be so kind or go out of your way for me. I'm not the best at conversations, and I feel you might get tired of talking to me." Upon hearing that, a sad expression crossed Emily's face. Why does seeing her like this make my heart feel so tight? Do you feel bothered by me following you around, Jake?" "What?" I was taken aback by Emily's unexpected words. Before the arranged date, I had already heard about training at this company. I wasn't sure about it, but after meeting you, I decided to come here. I thought I could grow in a workplace where there's a sincere and kind person like you, Jake, but it must be annoying for you, having a reserved woman like me always around, right? After hearing Emily's words, I was completely taken aback. The first time I met her, I thought she disliked me. But Emily had a rather positive impression of me. At first glance, she seemed distant, but through our conversation, I discovered a different side of her. Emily, like me, is a bit clumsy. She wants to communicate, but can't convey her feelings well, and can't show her true self to someone she just met. Once I learned this about her, I wanted to know Emily more than ever. It's not like that. I've always felt overlooked by women, so I thought you didn't like me either. That's not true. I had a great time on our date, Jake. I'm honored. I hope we can continue to get along. I'm the department head, so if there's anything you don't know, just ask. That conversation was the turning point for us, and we started to get along. As I learned as I got to know her, it seemed difficult to read her emotions from her facial expressions and tone of voice, and she was often misunderstood by those who met her for the first time. I thought our matchmaking date was a disaster, but Emily seemed to have enjoyed it. She didn't contact me after the date because she was hired by our company and wanted to surprise me. Despite her ice queen appearance, I learned that Emily is actually a straightforward and earnest woman. Moreover, she turned out to be incredibly competent, making a big difference at our company. But from my perspective as the department head, Emily definitely had challenges with communication. She's excellent at her job, but her monotone and expressionless manner sometimes gave others the impression she was apathetic and unsympathetic. Also, Emily was very hardworking, often trying to finish all her tasks by herself. From her perspective, she just wanted to be helpful to everyone. However, others perceived it as if it's up to others. I'll do it because I'm better. Kind of a one-woman show. Indeed, she had a self-sacrificing nature. I, considering others' views as well, shared some work-related advice with Emily. Emily had an open-minded character. She listened to my feedback without taking offense and always tried to make improvements. Here's an example. When Emily was engrossed in her work, she often had a stern look. That look intimidated others, so I came up with a way to lighten her mood. Whenever I saw that look, I'd poke the corners of my mouth with my fingers, prompting her to smile. By doing so, Emily began to smile more. Her smile was so charming, and it gradually changed the way others perceived her. In this way, she became aware of how to speak softly in her own way, and began to report, communicate, and consult with those around her as she went about her work. I also wanted others to see her strengths, so I asked Emily to prepare some meeting materials. The documents Emily created were thorough and easy to understand, impressing our coworkers. The materials Emily made are so clear. It must have taken a lot of effort to create something like this. Seeing her dedication to her job, everyone's perception of her began to change. Emily wasn't just talented, but also a very hard-working and sincere woman. It's been 3 months since she joined the company, and she seemed to fit in better than before. Emily's emotions have always been hard to read, but through her work, the other employees started to appreciate her more. Her sincerity and down-to-earth nature were well received by everyone. Emily took the initiative to improve her communication skills, and compared to when she first joined, she's gotten much better at expressing her thoughts. Seeing her continuous self-improvement, I found myself increasingly drawn to her. Though I've had past traumas regarding romantic relationships, I couldn't help but imagine building a warm home with Emily. We've been out for meals together a few times, and we frequently chat on texting apps or over the phone. She often uses smiley emojis in her messages. I believe she's trying to show me she enjoys our time together. I've grown so fond of her. By now, she's become indispensable to me. The moments we spend together are so comforting that I've found myself wishing we could always be this way. Just when everything seemed to be going smoothly, I noticed that something was off with Emily. She looks fine at first glance, but occasionally she'd have a troubled expression. One day, while we were dining at a restaurant, I asked Emily what was bothering her. "Emily, is something wrong? You seem quite troubled." When I asked her this, Emily, looking puzzled, began to deny it. No, it's nothing. I'm fine. Please don't worry about me." She tried to brush it off, but I could see through her lie. She was probably trying to hide it so I wouldn't worry. But I couldn't leave Emily in this condition. I made it a point to always keep an eye on her from then on. Then one day, I came to understand what had been bothering Emily. One day, there was a meeting with a client in the department I belonged to. At a meeting with a client in my department, Emily was assigned to serve coffee. I decided to check on her in the break room. Suddenly, I heard yelling from inside. It was, shockingly, Steve, director. "Hey, stop dawdling. Hurry up with that coffee. Not only are you slow, but you're also so rude. You're useless." Steve said that, hurling abusive words at Emily. She tried to hold back her tears while preparing the coffee. Seeing this, I was certain that Steve was the source of Emily's distress. It was, in fact, Steve who had assigned Emily the task of serving coffee. He must have been harassing her in such a secluded place. This is pure harassment. I couldn't contain myself and confronted Steve. "Director, what are you doing? We have clients here, and you're speaking to Emily like that. This could be considered harassment, you know." Even after I said this, Director Steve remained unfazed. I'm just guiding her as her boss. She thinks she's all that because she's somewhat attractive. Such a cold face, so arrogant. Besides, even if you guys report this, my esteemed position won't be affected in the slightest. That's when it happened. Steve, how could you say such things to the daughter of our client? Oh, my daughter is that cheeky, huh? Wait, isn't that Mr. Smith, the CEO of our client, and our CEO? As soon as our CEO and Emily's father, Mr. Smith, appeared in the break room, Steve turned pale as a ghost. That's right. The client who came to our company today was indeed Emily's father's company. In fact, both men had been informed in advance that something was off with Emily, and both were concerned about her. Steve's loud voice could be heard in the hallway, so the two men had been listening to our conversation from outside the break room. Steve was clearly flustered by this unexpected turn of events. "You mentioned your daughter, Mr. Smith." "Yes, Emily is my daughter." "Dad." Perhaps seeing her real father broke the tension for Emily. Emily went over to her father and broke down in tears. It was evident from this reaction just how much stress Emily had been under. Both CEOs gave Steve a contemptuous look. "Steve, we'll be having a thorough discussion about your actions towards her. We'll inform you of any disciplinary measures afterward. Brace yourself." "That's an exaggeration. I was just guiding Emily for her own good." Steve claimed that, but upon speaking with Emily, it became clear about his day-to-day conduct. According to Emily, Steve, who was married, had taken a liking to her beauty and had invited her out privately. Of course, Emily declined his advances. Upon being rejected, Steve began harassing Emily on a daily basis out of spite. Not wanting to cause any concern, Emily hadn't spoken to anyone about it. However, upon talking to other female employees, it was discovered that there were other victims of Steve. He had been approaching several female employees he took a fancy to. There were even women who were pressured into spending the night with him in exchange for favorable job evaluations. This behavior was deemed problematic, and Steve was demoted from his position. He was transferred to a branch office in a remote location. "I never imagined I'd get demoted at 50. My wife's left me, my kids have given up on me, and everything looks so bleak." After his demotion and a major pay cut, the director felt as though he had lost everything all at once. Considering he was a family man but still made advances to female coworkers, it's no wonder his family turned their backs on him. It's a classic case of getting what you deserve. It's truly a good thing that his misconduct came to light now, preventing further victims like Emily from being hurt. Emily, if you ever have any problems, remember you don't have to bear them all by yourself. After all, I'm a manager here, so feel free to discuss anything with me. As I said that, Emily looked genuinely remorseful. "I'm sorry, you're right. If I had spoken up sooner, we could have addressed the director's behavior much earlier." While the conscientious Emily felt that way, I wanted to convey more than just that. Of course, it was essential for us to be aware of the director's actions. However, what I truly wanted to express was my personal sentiment. I didn't want Emily to suffer alone. "I want to be there for you, Emily, no matter how minor your concerns might be. You mean a lot to me, Emily." "What?" Hearing my words, Emily's cheeks turned a deep shade of red. It seemed she finally understood my feelings. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd have another chance to express my feelings to a woman. I'm not afraid of getting hurt anymore. A determination to convey my feelings to Emily grew within me. I love you, Emily. I truly want to be by your side forever. The moment I said that, Emily looked at me, her face emotionless but with tears glistening in her eyes. In response, I playfully turned up the corners of my lips, like I always do. And as always, she flashed her warm smile back at me. It was even brighter than usual, a smile I was sure I'd never forget. She looked so content and happy in that moment. Though communication has always been a challenge for us, in that instant, I felt we truly connected. Maybe words aren't always necessary for true love,